shower, the water will come through in the recording. Actually, I don't think it would come through this one.
And even
Welcome to the wardrobe. This is the Who You Know podcast. I'm Rylan Deemer.
And I'm Elisa Wildy.
And today we have a very special guest. Joining us is an amazing man, number one commenter on the podcast, Trace Calloway. Welcome.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Should I say Trace Calloway the third?
No, the Trace is the third part of that. Yeah, my full name, legal name, I am a third, so I just go by Trace.
I forgot about that.
Wait, is this real?
Yeah.
So it's totally not real. Your middle name.
It's not my middle name.
How did I not know that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't introduce myself as, hey, it's Trace. Actually, that's not my real name. I'm living a facade, and this is just how I introduce myself to people. My real name is this, and this is what my dad's name is. This is a whole complicated story. But I go by Trace because my mom's a Spanish teacher, and she wanted to name me Trey, but there's someone else named Trey that my parents were already friends with. So they thought of Trace, uno, dos, Trace. Here we are.
And I just met you. That's my story.
Yeah,
that would be.
Yeah,
bro.
So do we want a second date from here? Because she's already left at this point. So I just kind of wait for it naturally to come up at some point where someone asks me.
Okay, so we've known each other for 2 years, and right?
Yeah,
maybe longer.
I mean, COVID's been 2 years, so.
Oh God. Thanks for reminding me.
All time is now measured in pandemic years.
Yeah, there's definitely the pre versus post COVID era, and yeah, life feels very different between those two.
Mm-hmm.
What's your real name? I
don't know why I was being weird about not saying it. Lauren James Calloway the third.
James.
Lauren,
Loran.
Loran. Oh, yeah. That's cool.
Yeah,
that's like a Lord of the Rings name, right?
I don't know.
No, it's a Game of Thrones name, right?
I guess, as long as I don't know if that's good. I could be a terrible character in Game of Thrones. I could be someone who died very early.
I mean, who do you think you would be?
I mean, statistically, I'd be someone who just died really early.
Sure.
One of those universes I would not want to live in.
Do you feel like you'd fit the statistical norm in most cases?
I don't know. It would just depend. I mean, I guess with a name like Lauren James Calloway III, there's some nobility involved. If you're in Game of Thrones, no peasant is naming their kid
right.
The third.
You've definitely got a protagonist name.
Yeah. That's nice at least. So hopefully it's. I'm again trying to think of which protagonist I'd actually like to be in Game of Thrones because things just don't end well.
True.
You just don't want to be anyone.
Yeah. Not in Game of Thrones at least. Lord of the Rings is also rough.
I don't know. No, you're right. Yeah, Lord of the Rings is darker than what what the vibe is of it.
Yeah, Hobbit, pretty fine. Living in the Shire in that time, lovely life. I think I could be quite satisfied with. But Lord of the Rings era, actually, war, death, it's not great. So yeah. I don't know. That's the problem is if you're gonna live in a fantasy story, it's probably not a good time to be living there in that world because that's when the story takes place.
Any story, any fantasy story, right?
I think in general, Harry Potter universe. Do you want to be living in the Harry Potter universe when those books are taking place? When the rise of Voldemort? Though I guess as they keep going and adding more detail, those times are also bad. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. There's now other dark wizards.
Maybe worlds are just always bad.
Yeah.
From a perspective, I'm sure you can always find something.
Or the badness adds to the good story.
All you have to do is focus on the negative.
Yeah. Have you ever heard that? I think it's a Chinese curse or something. I believe that's what I had heard somewhere on the internet. But it was, may you live in interesting times.
Yeah.
Because that would not be good.
Right.
Versus it's not exciting to say, I want to live in a boring time. But that's when things are safe and most likely enjoyable living your day-to-day life.
So I like that you brought that up because I think you have always seemed to me like a very learned man. And I learned this about you recently that you read a lot. So I guess what I want to talk about is New Year's resolutions, because I know like the massive amount of reading that you do is a part of an old resolution that you made a couple years back, if I understand. And you wanted to read one book a week for a year, but you've actually maintained that. So can you tell me a little bit about like what that journey's been like? And
so it started in college in terms of like making it a specific goal. I've always read a lot all through elementary school before. And at some point in college, I think it was early sophomore year, I realized I hadn't been reading a lot. A friend recommended a book for me, and I just devoured it. I was like staying up till 2 a.m. to read, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is so much fun!" I haven't done this in a while. I kind of forgot about it, so I wanted to put effort towards doing that again. And it was the first time I wasn't buying books and keeping them at home. So I started keeping a list on my phone of what books I was reading for class, books I was checking out of the library, so that if someone ever asked me, "Oh, what's a book I should read?" or like, "What have you been reading lately?" I could look and not forget what I'd already read. And so then I had this list, and that was fall semester. New Year's resolution comes around, and I was like, "Oh, that'd be like a cool resolution to try for is average reading a book a year, so 52 books,
a book a week."
Yeah.
Right.
Reading one book a year, not quite impressive.
That's my goal.
Very solid goal for a lot of people. Averaging one book a week for an entire year, so reading 52 books over the course of the year.
Do you have any rules as to like what qualifies as a book?
No, because it's fully personal. I'm not like comparing this to other people, so it just kind of depends on the specific situation. Because you can get a collection of Lord of the Rings books that are all one giant tome, but I will count that as 3 because it's normally considered 3, even though each Lord of the Rings book is technically 2 books. Yeah. They were only published together because of like the war shortage with paper, like they had to be bundled that way. But they have their own titles. Yeah, like the titles of the 3 Lord of the Rings books that we know were not what Tolkien thought of originally. He had the names for each of the 6 books that it's comprised of, and then the publisher was like, "Okay, we need to combine them and name them for that." So that was like more of an afterthought.
I didn't know that was the reasoning. I knew it was like, I've been described as 3 books, but there's 2 in each.
Yeah.
Like as a question, but
I didn't even know that there were 2 in each. So this is news to me.
Yeah.
What do you think was your reading average before you decided to do one a week?
I think like probably pre-college, it was probably not too dissimilar. It was probably like up there, at least 30 books, if not more. I'm just kind of guessing. And that's kind of like my thing with this, that Rylan, when you and I were talking about this earlier, that the goal isn't necessarily something that I feel like I have to work super hard to do. It's more of a way for me to track it and like remind myself that this is something I want to do, that I enjoy doing this, and I don't want to forget about it and be like, "Oh, it's been like 2 months since I read a book, and I should really get back to doing that." And so it's very rarely have I had to like push myself to hit the goal. There have definitely been times where I'm like, "Oh, I haven't been reading lately, been playing a lot more video games, let me like try and like catch up," and I'll like focus some time on it. But like that's the effect that I want this to have, is to be like, "Oh, I haven't been doing it enough lately, let me do some more."
And you say average a week, so will it take you like 2 weeks to read one book, but like a couple days to read another? Is what you mean? Okay.
Yeah, so originally I would keep track of like by semester, spring, summer, fall. I would group the books. It's taken me until I think last year was the first year I finally switched to quarters. I've been in the business world long enough that like, okay, it doesn't make any sense for me to try to figure out, all right, when would school have ended? And quarters are just much easier to divide by on the nice even month, rather than it was May 10th was the last day.
I mean, I think I speak for all of our audience when I say like that is way more reading than what I do and what most people do. So how are you able to like remember, or do you remember like the majority of what you read? How do the words go from like page to eyes to brain to your life? Like what is that?
Well, first I want to make a comment about saying that about like how much I read compared to the average person. We all read a ton. It's just about like what you choose to read and whether it counts as a book. If you read a lot of news articles, I don't really read the news much anymore. I used to for a while. But if you take that time, like you accumulate reading a lot of words, and same with like social media, there's a lot of like written word that we are constantly consuming. So it's just about putting that dedicated time towards a book versus something else. I mean, we all have studied for exams, and that involves a lot of reading.
Yeah.
And I've gone back and forth at different times on whether reading a book for study material counts as reading a book. It depends on exactly what book, how much of it did I read. But in terms of remembering what I've read, that's actually been something of like a current New Year's resolution, is to focus on taking notes on what I read a bit more intentionally, because for the longest time, just having the list of what I read was the only external marker of that, and it would be a good like reminder. I could go through and be, oh yeah, I do remember that book. I kind of think about it, but it was very haphazard. It was just whatever happened to stick with me from that reading experience. There might be a scene from a novel, or if it was a nonfiction book, oh, that was one idea that stuck with me that I'll occasionally think about. But now, as I'm reading, I'm trying to intentionally, every time I have that like click moment of, ooh, that's a cool idea, I want to write it down. So I've got a system on my computer of, now I keep track of the list there, and I can click within that book, and I have a template already arranged that differs between whether it's a fiction or nonfiction book, and has like a couple questions of like, okay, summarize this nonfiction book in 3 sentences. What was like a top quote from it? What were my overall thoughts on it? And then just like general notes that I can pull.
That's super cool.
So as I'm reading, I've got my computer next to me, and I have like notes on my phone. Sometimes I'll do audio notes. I was driving a lot over the past couple months and listening to audiobooks, and I could just hit a button on my phone and immediately try to rephrase what I just heard in my own words, and then like have that note there. So by the time I finish a book, I might have a couple paragraphs of what I took out of the book while reading it. And then I can go back and maybe make connections between different books I read and say, okay, well, this book mentioned this concept, and that actually sounds kind of similar to this one. How do I like reconcile this? So that's been great for me in terms of retention, like, because I'm clearly thinking more about what I'm reading, and then also forcing myself to like confront how well did I understand this, and like what do I actually take out of it.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you, like, I was going to ask, do you get ever mixed up in your brain? Like, was that like fiction versus nonfiction, or like, was this like real, or is this just like a made up thing in a book? And I feel like now that you explain that, you break it down by that, it'll help a lot more.
Well, so yeah, that's a new concept. I don't know how often I've had to think, was that? It's definitely happened. There have definitely been times where I say, I don't remember, was that scene like something I read in a memoir, or was that a fiction book that someone was talking? And sometimes it doesn't matter. Like, does this feel real? Is this like something that is like believable that someone could experience this, and like the thing they said makes sense? It doesn't really matter to me if it was a fiction or nonfiction book. But there are plenty of times where I think back of like onto a scene. Where did that happen? Like, what book was it that I was reading? And so that's when it is useful for me to kind of like go back through it. I can scroll and say, okay, which books did I read? Which of these were likely? And it's kind of like a fun exercise to like try to like piece it back together, reconstruct what did I read, what was I imagining.
Do you ever like link what you're reading to where you are too, like where you read the book, like if it was at home or on vacation?
Yeah, and I've always liked the idea of like having a journal and like keeping track of the things that I do, but I've never done anything like it seriously. So my list of books is the closest that I have to that. When I scroll through it, I can see, oh yeah, that's what I was reading that book on this vacation. Oh, I remember reading it on the boat, on the lake. And so there are very clear like snapshots in my mind from reading different books at different stages of my life.
I think I really, really like the idea of like taking the notes and writing down things to, you know, kind of maximize the time that you spent and like improve the value or whatever that you're getting out of it. Can you help me develop something similar for video games, or maybe you already have? My system for video games is nowhere near strong. I started keeping a list of games I played for the same reason, for when I'm talking about it. I'm more likely to remember which ones I've played. But I've started like at least trying to write down some of the like experiences, feelings, thoughts, whatever that a video game gave me, so I could remember that or articulate it better whenever I wanted to talk to someone, because I've already thought through it. So yeah, I would love to sit down and like talk about that with you. That'd be like a really fun thing to work out like a template for. So I'm curious to like, one, look at your templates for books, and then see if we can fine tune something specific for games.
Dang, I feel like I don't have a topic that I can write about.
Yeah, get out of here.
I mean, I think that's the thing, is it's interesting once you start trying to write about something, that if you just force yourself to write, and you know, you always have that little voice in the back of your head say, this isn't good enough, or I don't know what to say, I don't have anything. If you actually force yourself to write down what you think and start looking at that and just being completely open with it, you realize that you have a lot that's going in your mind that you're constantly discarding. I think it's similar to meditation in a lot of ways, of like being able to just let the thought go through you without judgment.
Yeah.
But so if you can like write it down and look at it, and you can then analyze that thought, like, is this something I actually agree with? Is there like a connection to make here? Is where can I like push deeper on it? At least in my experience, that has helped me like clarify my thoughts on a lot of different things, versus just like having a brief thought, think about it for a moment, and then like letting it go, and then never really like finishing it.
Yeah.
There's also like the idea of something getting stuck in your head. It's so nice to put it on paper, and you feel like you can kind of forget about it. Like any kind of like nagging, oh, I need to do this. I don't know if you have like to-do systems. Yeah, it gets it out of your head, and you can just feel better about it.
Yeah, that's usually like keeping me up at night. I write it down on my phone so I don't have to worry about it anymore. But even like, I always talk to Dan about this because like sometimes I feel like he never has like a quiet moment to just think to himself, whereas like I do it all the time because I don't have like a lot of media that I just like go to. I can scroll on my phone, but there's like in the car, I won't listen to anything often, and I'll just be thinking in my head, and it's like thoughts over and over, and I'm like, do you ever do this, or is it just me? And like, so maybe I need to start writing my thoughts down because I think a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. I think it's something that I struggle to do because there's always some form of media, and now I've been listening to audiobooks more. So like as soon as I had them, I'm like, oh, this would be a good time to do an audiobook.
Yeah.
But I think like being able to take that time to reflect is necessary.
Yeah, I similarly, I feel like at all times I'll have like a YouTube video going on my phone just for like, like a podcast or whatever, even as I'm like doing chores and like just doing stuff around the house. And it got to the point where I felt like it was a little too invasive. So like I've stopped like playing any music or videos or anything while I'm like showering. Usually when I'm like brushing my teeth, just like these like brief moments that I like to have where like I feel like the technology isn't invading for just a bit.
Yeah,
is nice. And then of course meditation's like beyond that even more. So it even gets the thoughts out of the picture. So
I did want to ask one more question about reading. Do you ever start a book and not finish it? Like, or do you just push through?
For most of my life, I pushed through. There would be times where I would not finish, but 80% of the time I'd want to finish, and that is a downside of like having a goal of like to finish. But okay, I've already read half this book. Like, if I want it to count on my list, I need to finish it. And so I have made it like kind of a pseudo New Year's goal for this year is to not finish more books. But that's really hard to structure as a goal in terms of like a number. Like, do I say, oh, I want to not finish 10 books this year? Because like I never go into a book hoping to not finish it.
Right.
So I haven't quite figured it out. But I'm thinking about tracking books I don't finish and like counting that as still an accomplishment because for me it is.
Yeah.
I'm like slowly coming to realize that there's nothing inherently virtuous in finishing something just in itself. Like if I can attach meaning because I got something out of it, then great. But if I'm not, then I shouldn't finish it. And I feel that way so often with TV shows, books, video games, that once I've started, I gotta finish it or I didn't do the thing.
Yeah, but it's like another thing you can talk about, like why didn't I like this book? Why was it bad? Like yeah. And I was wondering if you just like enjoy reading so much that's why you finish it, but you do regret finishing it sometimes.
There are plenty of books. Yeah, okay. I can think back to like a couple within the past few months that as I've been trying to do this more, that I'm like, I'm glad I finished that, or I did not finish it because I got halfway through. I don't remember almost anything of what I read, even though I read 400 pages. So the other 300 pages that I was going to read, not going to get anything else out of it.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to go back because I talked about like words on the page to the eyes, to the brain, to the life. And I want to know more about how this has impacted your life. Like what, lessons are you learning that change how you live or change the way you think or interact with people? Like I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, I think that on the one hand, it's something I definitely want to do. I should be benefiting from this, at least in some way. So I'm okay reading for pure enjoyment. I think that's fine. But I think that like even just baseline reading, you get some empathy of looking through someone else's perspective. Just reading fiction, you're seeing someone's life that you might never have imagined on your own from your own perspective and life experiences. So I think that's inherently valuable on its own. But then it's also hard to like separate, okay, how is this impacting my life? How have I changed? What wouldn't I have done? There's no counterfactual me that didn't read to see what that looks like. And then you have those specific books that have an idea that sticks with you, that you like think about and you want to implement. And there are some times where it's like, okay, I don't know that I was able to bring that into my life. And then there are times where I might not even notice that it impacted. So it's something I think about a lot. I don't know how to say that, like, I certainly don't have any kind of system to like make this happen.
But I mean, let me distill what I just heard. You're saying you don't know if it had an impact on your life because you're not able to like formulate an experiment around it to prove it?
I guess I can be confident that it had an impact. It can be hard to say what impact it did have and how much of an impact. And so I'm trying to think of like a specific idea. So I mean, I've read plenty of books that talk about meditation as like a beneficial thing. And so my attempts at meditation, I've not stuck with it for very long at any point, are all like due to that. There are things that talk about like relationship stuff, and I can see that like I make more of an effort to do that. Or recognizing things within myself because I have like a name for it. Being able to label something is incredibly useful, but it's still hard to like say, okay, what change did that affect?
Okay, sure. I mean, it's just, I think I understand. It's not how I think, but I think I get what you're saying. Like, it's hard to know exactly without seeing the alternative reality version of yourself.
Yeah, well, and I think it's hard for me to trace back like a decision because
to trace back.
I feel like it's like, there's a whole complicated morass of ideas and thoughts that are in my head at any time when I'm thinking through something, or not thinking, doing something automatically. And a lot of that comes from things that I've read, but it's all like being combined in this like soupy mess that I can't sit there and point and say, that book is what it is, that's where that idea came from, or something like that.
Do you think maybe the quantity of books interferes with your ability to distinguish how they're individually impacting you?
I think it can, especially to Elisa's point about like taking some time to like just be with your thoughts. Like if I think I benefit more from finishing a book and just sitting there not doing anything with it and thinking about what did I just read. And if I go ahead and write that down, that is still part of that thinking through exercise. Yeah. But if I finish a book and immediately pick up another one and start reading and like don't ever break that up into a thinking phase, I think for sure it gets more blended and lost.
Oh, this is super interesting.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think the journaling helps with that. And so it makes me want to do it, even though I'm probably only going to read. My goal this year would be like 3. But if I like journaled after those 3, I feel like I would get a lot more benefit out of it, because one of them I'm reading, I already read half of it. I talked to someone about it and like they said, oh, this happened then, right? And I was like, I don't remember any of that, and I already read half of it. So yeah, the journaling, even if I read half a book.
And some of my hesitancy in talking about like how these things impact my life might be that like I'm still like going through a lot of it, like a lot of those books that are like most in my mind right now. I'm thinking like how are they changing my life, are things I'm still trying to figure out exactly like how do I implement that, and like how do I structure my life in a way that like I can be happy and like proud of the things that I'm doing. And so it's still kind of like an unfinished thing. So I don't know, still have a lot to think about.
Do the books do you feel like you overthink? Like so many books are throwing different ideas at you. You're like confused with what you read, or does it usually helpful?
I think it's usually definitely more helpful.
Okay.
It's rare that I see such conflicting ideas that I'm like, oh, I'm so lost. If I'm overthinking things, that's probably me just naturally being the type of like over analytical person.
A trap many actuaries fall into.
Yeah. So, but we've talked a lot about my reading goals. What did you guys have? Any New Year's resolutions?
I mean, I wanted to finish a book this year. I did that. I finished The Hobbit.
One book
There
a
you
year.
go. You were 1 month in. You've already finished a goal.
I was already halfway through the book, but I finished it, and I was pretty happy. And like at the end of the book, there was a chapter of Lord of the Rings, the first chapter. And Dan's like, "You should probably read that." And I'm like, "I just finished a book. I don't want to read something." And it was like, and so I was like, "Can you just summarize it for me?" So then he did. I was not going to read the first chapter of Lord of the Rings, but now I'm on my second book, so I'm like, maybe I can do 3 books this year. So that's my little goal.
So. Is that your only goal for the year? You got the
I mean, that wasn't like one of my first goals. I like do goals a lot even during the year, but so like at the start of the year, I was like, okay, I hadn't worked out in a while, so like I was like 2 workouts a week, and then when I don't do that, I want to do like yoga at least once a week and meditate at least once a week. I have not done the latter two, so like that's still something I need to like figure out how to fit into my life, because I think I just don't have the routine for them yet, and that's a big thing for me. If I want to get something accomplished, I kind of need that routine to like make it happen.
If I got a book for you.
If you want a little cheat code for meeting those goals, yoga is meditation.
Like at
It's
the
a 2
same
for
time,
1.
I might want them separate. Yoga might be my like, I'm waking up, get me ready for the day. Like that's kind of like my yoga thought.
Yeah, does that depend on the type of yoga you're doing? Because I just know there's a lot of different types of yoga. I'm not very familiar.
I guess I don't know a ton about yoga, but yoga is a form of meditation in its like traditional sense. So you can be meditative through a yoga practice.
Yep. Usually I'm just complaining how much my shoulders hurt in my head. So I think that's part of the reason of wanting to do yoga is I want to build that shoulder strength and get more flexible. And so like that's like my goal with yoga, I think. And so then my meditation goal is like separate. I don't think I want to combine them is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Can I talk about goals for a moment? So this is really like Trace, you and I have had a couple conversations about goals, and I think, I mean, the more that I hear you describe how you think about it, I kind of wonder if we have a similar approach in some ways, and maybe we're just labeling things different. But like when I think about goals for myself, I think of them as like things that are not useful to me. Like I don't like goals. I don't like setting goals because I don't seem to get anywhere with them, or it makes it harder for me to like achieve. And so how I end up framing things mentally is like, let's take like fitness, for instance. How I think about it is like, I am the kind of person who maintains a healthy, like physically healthy lifestyle. And therefore I'll just do things to achieve that. So like I'll eat healthy because like I am a healthy person is how I think. Even if I'm not healthy in that moment, like that's what gets me to like do the thing that is healthy. Or like the past 8 or 9 months I've been, working out at the gym several times a week, and I've never once had a day where I was like, I don't really feel like it, because it's more like an identity thing. Once I turn on that like identity switch, like I am the kind of person who does this, then I just do it. And there's no goal. I'm not like, I want to be able to lift this much. I want to look awesome when I'm flexing hard at the beach. Like I want to, whatever. Like I don't have any thought like that in my head. It just, I'm telling myself like I am a strong person who stays lean. And then like everything else just seems to happen. Like I just do the thing. So what I've found in the past, like when I used to be, I guess I would say like super goal oriented. And I was talking about this a little bit last night. Like when I was like young in my career, like early 20s, I was like, yeah, I'm going straight to the C-suite. I'm going to be CEO or whatever. And like just very like driven and focused on that. But I get so bummed out because I'd be thinking, like I would sit there and I'd be like, that's so far away. Or like, like I feel like it's never going to happen for XYZ. And like those thoughts would slow me down from actually achieving in the moment, because they would be disruptive thoughts that like depress my ability to like actually be effective and valuable in the workplace, or like a good collaborator, because they would be interfering with just like my ability to like be here and look at you and be like, hey Trace, how's it going? And so once I finally got to the point where like I was like, all right, just forget about like thinking that far in the future. Like what am I good at now? Let me find something that fits that and that like is fulfilling to me, and we'll see what happens. And like the more that I do that and live in the moment, doing like being in the place where I fit, like as a puzzle piece, then it's like all the achievements fall into place. So the same thing happened with my exam. So my final actuarial exam, unlike all the other exams, was brutal for me, and I failed it, I think, 5 times before I finally passed.
Jeez.
The failures kind of like accumulated in me, and like I would kind of like tear myself down about it. And once I finally got to the point, and big credit to meditation for this, once I finally got to the point where like I learned how to like be very compassionate and forgiving toward myself, I was able to like put that negativity to the side, and I stopped thinking about I'm going to pass the exam or I need to pass the exam or whatever. Like that all went to the side, and every day I was like, I am the kind of person who studies because he already decided he's going to sit for the exam, so he's going to study, 2 hours a day or whatever. And that's the time when I finally passed. It was like when I got rid of all the things that I was like focusing on in the future and just like took each day as the person that I wanted to be. That's when I ended up achieving. It's the journey, not the destination.
Yeah.
I think we might have a similar mindset, and maybe we've just come to like look at things through a different lens.
So I think this has been very helpful. And I actually read a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear recently. And so that's what I was going to recommend, talking about like how to do this. It's very useful and informative. And so that the idea of identity being like that first step towards your goal or to like helping you to create that habit is huge, because if you're the type of person who is fit or eats well, then it's very easy to make the decision. You're not having to like use your willpower. This is just something that I do. This is the type of person I conceive. And so many people will try to start with the action versus starting with the identity. And he describes it as doing those actions is like a vote for the person that you want to be. And whatever kind of person receives the most votes, that's the type of person that you will start to think of yourself as or feel. And so even if you're like not doing the thing perfectly, like just showing up to the gym is a vote for being the type of person who goes to the gym. You don't have to have a great workout, but you showed up. And so it's interesting to me to hear the way you think about it, that like we both recognize that importance of the identity and the system of like, what am I doing day to day? But I still take that and say, okay, well, my goal is still to be a fit person. I still think define that as a goal or label it as a goal. And then, okay, I want to think about the structure, whereas you say, I don't think the label of goal is that useful. Like I'm not getting any value out of calling it a goal, because all I care about is those different identities. So I still have like a little bit of a blended approach where with my working out, the most important thing to me is doing that consistently and like being effective. But at the same time, there are things that I would like to be able to get out of it. I want to be able to do a pull-up while having like 60% of my body weight of an additional weight. I want to be able to do a freestanding handstand push-up. So like the system is
so tough.
Yeah, it will be.
Yeah.
But like that's exciting to me, is that like I can see that what I'm currently doing I enjoy daily, and it leads towards a goal that I will like. So the goal is like both the system and an outcome. Yeah. So I have like short-term goals of like, oh, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to do this if I keep going on this path. I'll be like, these things will probably happen if I keep doing this. And there are things like, it'd be nice, but like, I don't really care, but I could like see them happening. So I am able to like put them in these different buckets without getting so tied up in that goal, because, like the goal isn't necessarily useful just by having a goal. James Clear points out that like the difference between winners and losers isn't their goal. Like everyone's goal was to win whatever game or like thing you're doing, but it's how you like systematize that and like how you look at your life.
I feel like that's why when I think of a goal, like what am I trying to say? I don't think big. I feel like all my goals are very small and very like stepwise. Like this would be nice, I'm gonna do this. This would be nice, I'm gonna do this. And it's like that's why I said I have so many goals during the year, because like it's just like something that's like I want to be able to do this, or it's very small for me, because when you're talking about like a big goal, those are like never in my head. Someone's like, what do you like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I have no idea. Like I never think that far ahead, and it's like one of the hardest questions for me to answer. That's interesting. And also with the identity thing, growing up playing volleyball, I mean, we did like a lot of like psychological stuff with sports, and like one of the biggest things I took out of it is like the I can, I am, I will. I might have said those backwards. I am, I can, I will statements. And I feel like that's very similar. Like if I wanted to like I'm the last server in a game, for example, and I can't mess up, that's something I would go back and say to myself is like, I am a good server, I can get this in, and I will get this point or something like that. It's kind of like a manifestation, I feel like, when you tell yourself
it's a mantra.
kind of,
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And I still use that a lot. And like, I'll definitely, if I keep coaching, eventually still use that on students. I don't know if that's the right word, players.
So yeah, I don't want to go too far back into your question about like getting stuff out of reading, but like as you're talking about that, I mean, I'm able to immediately say, oh, I'm just reading this book about this, and now I have some different terminology than the first time we had this conversation where I wasn't thinking of it in the same way, and so at least I can point out the difference. And then as you're talking, I'm thinking about that, and then I'm having to remind myself of other books I've read talking about active listening and saying like, okay, don't focus on your response, listen to what he's saying. So like those kind of things are there, and if I'm focused on it and like trying to trace it back, I have at least some capacity to do so. But it is not something, I don't necessarily have the catalog of, oh, these are changes that came about because of something I read. But it's definitely there.
Maybe one last point that I'll make. The more goals you have, the less freedom you've given yourself, because you're working towards something you've already specified. But if you don't specify anything, then it's like wide open what you end up doing, right? So there is that aspect of it. And I've been enjoying not feeling as bound to goals as I used to be, because it's broadened how I think about my future and where I could go from here.
I feel like my goals are my freedoms, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Like
I love it.
Like I wanted to get really good at making cookies. That might have been my goal. It's because I like love doing it, or like doing it. And so like I think if I found out this is not enjoyable, I would have quit. And I don't care if I didn't reach my goal or whatever.
Sure.
But like it was something I wanted to explore maybe. And so like I also don't think I would just hold myself to my goals very much. Maybe that's my
being
freedom.
willing to drop them if they're no longer useful is important. So I think I use my goals a lot as a direction. So okay, what type of identity do I want to have? Well, if I can think about a specific concrete goal that I want to be able to do, then that can help inform the identity. Saying I want to be able to do a handstand has definitely changed my identity to someone who practices handstands a lot. But like it definitely came from wanting to be like, oh, I think that'd be cool to be able to do. And so like working on it. So it reminds me of that quote of plans are worthless, but planning is everything. And so, but I'm willing to discard that. I talked with you at New Year's about trying to learn German. I spent about 3 weeks doing it. And then I was like, I'm not getting a lot out of this. I don't really have like a reason to keep doing this. So I stopped.
Yeah, but also to that point, I wanted to pass an actuarial exam. That was like a hindrance on my freedom, but it was to open more freedom later, I think. I just want to get it done.
Yeah.
So like there are like some heavy goals that you don't really want to do, but you do. So I get the like also, affecting your freedom with some of them.
Both give me a lot to think about.
I've been thinking about it since we started talking about this like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
so,
and I think I'm going to continue thinking about it for a while, because it's one of these, like thinking about goals or no goals, or how we plan and what we do and what like drives us in life. I mean, it's like so much of living.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating to hear like different perspectives
and I still think like we might all be thinking about it the same, but yet differently. Like it's a different lens, and so like however it helps someone to think about it best, like that's how it should be. Like say I don't want to be like, guys, you need to set goals, like because I benefit from it, but
except
it's
my way
different.
is best, right?
Well, and you've got me thinking about like how does my satisfaction level with whatever it is tie up with a goal? Because if you don't have a goal about something, then you don't fail to meet that goal. But then, so I feel like I have a growth mindset in a lot of ways, which is good in most situations. Like I want to be able to say, oh, I can improve. But then if you overly fetishize that like growth and improvement and not being able to just willing to accept and be happy with where it is, then it becomes a negative thing rather than a beneficial mindset.
Yeah.
And I also want to point out, like, not having a goal doesn't mean that you don't experience failure. But like how I kind of experience it, like let's say I eat something unhealthy. Let's say I order pizza one night and I just like eat a pizza, a whole pizza. Then I've done something that is different from how I view myself, and it just feels really disruptive and kind of it's not like I don't feel like I failed. I feel like there's some alternative reality version of myself that's trying to break through, and I'm like, no, it's just not me, and it just feels weird and kind of like slightly disturbing if I do something different from how I view myself. So like I think what I'm experiencing is failure.
Yeah.
But like by not having a goal so far in the future, like something that's like years out or whatever, what I'm essentially doing is I'm just not ruminating on something that feels far away and feeling like, I don't know, like it's some unattainable thing, because you can achieve like incredible stuff.
Yeah.
Without even like looking at it.
For sure.
Yep.
It's interesting that you like describe that as failure though, because like it's not the word that I would use. I don't know how I would like think of that, but I also
like eating a pizza.
Yeah.
I don't know if failure is the right word, but like I feel some like internal disruption.
I definitely get that, because it's different than the identity,
and not just like the gut.
Yeah.
Dealing with the pizza.
But I'll say that I think that's something that I've gotten better at, like noticeably, within my 20s, of being able to like have that identity that's more accepting of myself, and say like, oh yeah, it's okay that like for me to do this, like I'm the type, I don't have to be the type of person who's perfect in all of this, or like just because I think I'm the type of person who does X doesn't mean I do X all the time, or like never does this.
Right. Yeah, and I am the kind of person that does eat pizzas occasionally.
Right, and I love that about myself. I love eating pizza.
Yeah.
But the word I was thinking of when you said that is like guilt. Because like even when I do something that backtracks on a goal of mine, then like, I feel guilty or like disappointed. And why? It's because it's the opposite of what I wanted to achieve, I guess, or like a hindrance to what I want to achieve. Like if that happened to me, like if I didn't hit my 2 workouts.
Guilt,
so. Oh really?
No,
I didn't. Okay.
I'm just kidding.
Like dang.
Don't worry.
Teach me those lessons.
Rylan has no guilt.
No, actually, a lot of like my meditation, like the positive things that I've seen coming from meditation is, like for me, I have a very distractible mind, and so meditation was very hard, especially when I was starting out. Like I would constantly get distracted, my mind would start wandering all over, and I would kind of beat myself up about that a little bit, and then refocus. But after failing to like maintain focus so many times and beating myself up about it so many times and then forgiving myself so many times, you're like flexing that forgiveness muscle over and over again. And you eventually get really good at just being like, yeah, I make mistakes. That's okay. I'll try not to do it. And, everything's good. Like when I feel guilt now, I'm much better able to process it and just be like, yeah, I'm the kind of person that makes a mistake occasionally. And that's all right. We're all doing the life thing. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And also, you had both mentioned meditation earlier. And I think that's one of the amazing things about meditation, especially if you're somebody who does get distracted really easily. You're also one of the people who will see some of the most incredible gains even early on in your meditation practice, because you will build up that forgiveness muscle. You'll be a lot more compassionate toward yourself after practicing meditation for a while.
That's definitely one of the reasons why I would like to meditate more.
Yeah.
But
all right, do we want to talk about calisthenics?
We were talking about this word before you got here, and like practicing saying it.
Yeah. To say it is just calisthenics. Like you had it. Calisthenics. It's body weight exercises.
Okay, so
essentially all it comes down to.
So for the calisthenics, body weight exercises. So that's all it is.
Picking up cows for calisthenics, but calisthenics.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, body weight exercises is calisthenics. So that is, you have your like strength workouts just like anything else, but calisthenics also has a lot of like skill workouts. So the handstand, the L sit, where you push yourself off the ground and have your feet basically in an L shape.
I love that.
Yeah.
I do that for fun, not for long periods, but yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably what I like the most about it. Well, first off, there's the flexibility of it, that you can kind of do it anywhere. I don't have to go to a gym if I have a pull-up bar, or I can do push-ups literally anywhere. And so with the pandemic, not going to a gym is a plus. And then I get a lot of benefit from the working towards the skill thing. Like that is a lot of my enjoyment comes from, I can do this thing that I could not do 2 months ago. And so that is very encouraging. Whereas, I mean, it's still encouraging to be able to lift a larger number of like weight than you could before, but it's not the same like level of fun that like this is a new movement for my body.
Yeah.
So.
And then you can pull out cool party tricks because
Yeah.
you don't need anything.
Exactly. You're not going to be like, all right, go ahead and put 400 pounds on the barbell. I'm going to do a squat and wow everyone. You'd be like, no, I'm going to drunkenly do a handstand.
But yeah, impressively.
Yeah, so I saw you doing a handstand yesterday while we were doing some rock climbing, which, by the way, I almost got a little emotional because yesterday was only the second time that I've climbed since my shoulder injury in 2019. And yesterday was the first time that I've climbed without having like shoulder pain since then.
Yeah.
And yeah, I almost got a little emotional because I was like, I can do it. Like, it just felt so good to like.
And do it very well. He was impressive.
Thank you. You were impressive too. The way that you campused that one route.
It's like different things. He was very technical, and I just have like general fitness at this point. My technical skills are not there.
Yeah. So, just to kind of explain, like Trace climbed a route using just his hands. Like his feet were just like dangling while he climbed the route. It was stupid. But yeah, while we were at the climbing gym, you were doing some handstands, and I wanted to save this question for the podcast. What does that even work out? Like, what muscles are in action there?
So your shoulders take a lot of it. I mean, then the rest of your arm a little bit. And then your core has to stabilize. So it's close to a full body. I mean, your legs are having to do like a little bit to keep you up there. So it's not really working that out. But yeah, shoulders for sure are probably the biggest one. But with rock climbing, you're doing so much gripping and pulling, your forearms get tired. So just pushing your hand the other way brings such relief. So doing a handstand in between routes was actually like a way to help me recover because the pushing motion of a handstand is completely different from the pull. So that antagonistic muscle movement was actually like allowing it to rest and recover a bit better for me. And then I'm trying to get better at the handstand. So
when I was really regularly climbing, because you're gripping like so hard the whole time, your fingers are just like locked up half the time. I did these home exercises with like these bands that go around the fingers, and you actually like extend them like that to like work out the antagonistic muscle. And I also knew a guy back in Chicago who climbed way more than me, and he would like wake up with his hands balled into fists at night because he wasn't doing like the other exercise. And so eventually he had to start doing like the finger extension exercises too, because it just became like way too tight.
Yeah, that's kind of why. So I've gone for the past 3 weekends in a row rock climbing with different people, and it's been primarily because it's social. Like I have friends that are going, so it's a good time to like hang out, be a little active. But I keep asking either people that are there, like work there, that like, how do you make this your primary workout? Because to me, it seems like you end up missing a lot of things. Like I get that as a rock climber, you don't necessarily want large legs because it's just extra weight, and you don't really need more than like baseline strength in your legs for most rock climbing. But so much of it is just pulling that I was like, you're not even getting like pushing exercises. So the one guy,
you do get some.
There, I think in some of from what I've heard from just talking to people, there's some like more advanced movements and stuff. But as a beginner, I'm not really doing a whole lot of pushing, and I still think it's a very particular type of push, and probably not nearly as frequent as the pulling that you do. And so talking to one of the guys that worked at the gym, he said that a lot of climbers end up with like elbow issues because it's like an imbalance where they're pulling.
Climber's elbow.
Yeah. You get your pull-ups, your dips. I bought a set of rings. Yeah, I got a pair of gymnastics rings that when it was nice outside, I would hang from a tree in our front yard so I could work out there. But now they hang from a pull-up bar in the basement.
Do you think I feel like it would help your mobility a lot too.
Yeah, something I've like worked on as well around then. One of the exercises to do is called a Nordic Curl. It's a Nordic Hamstring Curl, and so basically you have your feet underneath something or like weighted down, and then you lower your torso down. So it's just all ideally you'd be able to lift yourself back up as well, but just doing the negative is hard enough.
Yeah.
And so that strengthened my hamstrings. All my life, I've never been able to touch my toes. Like I'm very inflexible.
Wow.
And after doing that, I don't know, it was probably a couple months of doing it, and I just randomly was like, oh, can I touch my toes? And I was like easily able to do it. And I was like, what? And I realized it was the fact that my hamstrings were stronger, and it just wasn't something I thought of that, like, I thought I needed to sit and do passive stretches to get to that level of flexibility, but it turns out, like, strength is a good component of that flexibility. So I looked up, like, an actual program to improve hamstring flexibility, and I, like, incorporated that in twice a week. I've been doing it. So I can easily get palms to the floor now because of that.
Wow. Yeah, I might ask you for that later.
Yeah, for sure. I've sent that video to, like, multiple people at this point. It's not fun. Flexibility is all about embracing the suck. And in that, like, there's, like, a meditative aspect for me of, like, dealing with the pain. It's not that same, like acknowledging thoughts and, like, forgiving. It's I can sit and be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I love telling people how much I hated it afterwards, because, like, I hate it so much while I'm doing it. It just feels so, like, so much relief to be like, oh God, that was awful. I hated it. It was so bad. But then I love the outcome of it. So then I keep doing it. I switched from doing full body 3 times a week to upper lower split each twice a week. And so now I have an hour for each of those, and I've added, like, strength and mobility stuff into the workout. So, like, my shoulder flexibility has improved a lot, and I've noticed that has a lot of benefits with a handstand.
Yeah, because that's one thing that sucks for me when doing yoga is I do feel like downward dog, for example, you're, like, bending your shoulders back, and I just, like, can't do it. Or even like we were talking about lifts where you hold the barbell above you, and I just can't squat with it because my shoulders don't go back to keep the bar, like, good place with gravity. And so, like, a lot, like, that's one thing that I would love to improve is my shoulder mobility, and I've heard that just hanging on something is also, like, good. So I feel like the rings might have helped you a lot with that too. I don't know if you hang on them.
Not really. I mean, so I use a pull-up bar to do pull-ups, and then occasionally I will, like, do it on rings. But it's not quite the biggest one for me is a dumbbell lat pullover, where you basically, like, hold it and you are horizontal and you bring it over and, like, let your shoulders go as far back as possible and then move it back over.
Yep.
Because working on that strength through the range of motion that you want, like having to move the weight further than you normally would, helps, like, again, build that strength back there.
Yeah. Okay.
I've been working with Jay a lot with it because he is incredibly, like, I thought I was inflexible, but it was mostly by legs. Like, has very poor flexibility across the board. But even with just, like, 2 weeks of it, he's already noticed a benefit.
Oh, wow, cool.
I was gonna ask. So good.
Yeah.
Hey, actually, before we close out the episode, I want to say to everyone, if you are a watcher of the podcast, or if you're just watching this episode and you're thinking, hey, it would be cool to go on a podcast, we are looking for new guests. I would love to have more people approach us saying they want to join. We sometimes feel a little bit awkward, like, pushing out things on Facebook saying, like, hey, we want you to come join our podcast. I know, like, we've also felt awkward, like, if we haven't talked to somebody in a while, we don't want it to seem like the only reason we're reaching out is to get you on the podcast.
Yeah, like, there's so many good people I feel like I'd want to talk to and pick their brain at different things. And I just feel like an annoyance to, like, reach out. So it's not that I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
I want you to come on.
Yeah, and I guess I want to stress, like, this is a really fun time. And if you're feeling a little bit, like, uncomfortable about, like, being out there on the internet, we are totally also, like, we want to work with people, record an episode, and if at the end of it you're like, you know what, I don't want that out there, we don't need to publish it at all. We're just happy to, like, sit and chat and have, like, an in-depth conversation, because I feel like people nowadays just aren't spending as much time getting to know each other on, like, a deeper level with long-form conversations. Obviously, it's been harder with COVID and everything. So this has been, like, a really enlightening podcast to have at this time of our lives. So yeah, if you are enjoying this and would like to have this kind of conversation, please reach out. If you don't live in our area, in the heart of the Midwest, that's okay too. I would still love to know if you're interested, because we recently did our annual planning meeting for the podcast, first annual planning meeting. And one of our priority items is working out how to do a virtual version of the podcast. So if you don't live near us, that may be an option in the coming months. So please reach out. We would love to build up our pipeline a bit more, so we can have a more regular guest cadence. Trace, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and thank you all for joining us in the world.